And I started looking for those clues, started questioning those beliefs. Life is happening for me. What if everything's happening
Wow.
for me? What if literally every single thing that is happening in my life is happening for me? And that one belief I've transformed.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Intentional Leader Podcast. This is the podcast where you hear the real stories of people just like you who have become extraordinary leaders. You'll learn valuable lessons from their lives, lessons that you can apply to become the best leader you were created to be. When leaders are intentional, lives are changed. I'm your host, Sean Olson. I am an author, speaker, business owner, and obviously podcast host. Thank you for tuning in today. If you would help us out as we get started today by hitting that subscribe button, that like button, leaving us some comments. So YouTube and Apple Podcasts and iHeart Podcasts, all these groups like us better and hit those algorithms well. We'd appreciate it. Friends, listeners, you're in for a treat today. Our guest is Peter Kolat. He is known simply as the human architect, and you'll find out why as we go. Peter, welcome to the Intentional Leader Podcast.
Well, Sean, thanks for having me, man. I am really excited to be here and contribute to your audience.
Absolutely. We're glad to have you. I know this is going to be a great conversation. To get us rolling here today, just tell us a little bit about Peter, your leadership journey. And I know that this is where that human architect comes into play, your early career and leadership lessons you learned.
Yeah, so I mean, my journey, I was born back in the communist Poland back in the 70s. I just aged myself pretty quickly right there.
Yeah.
Came here to the United States with no English, just a suitcase in my hand when I was like 14 years old. Learned the English, went to college, got a degree in architecture. So I was building a lot of buildings here in Michigan. And as the journey kind of evolved, 2008 hit. I don't know if you remember those times. Those were some fun times. Yep.
Oh, yeah.
And during that particular time, I had to pivot and ended up creating my own business. And it was basically a marketing business for real estate agents and investors because I was in that industry already, right? So I pivoted in there and I started doing my business the wrong way. And what quickly happened was, I would say quickly because about 3 years later, my wife came to me and she said she wants a divorce. And while this was shocking news, in retrospect, looking back at it, there was a lot of signs that was basically telling me this is what's going to happen. And a lot of it had to do with my business because I was basically business, and I wasn't fully home. You know what I mean? So went into what I call an optimistic depression, and for about a period of 2 years. And from that point on, I learned a lot about myself. I had like almost like an awakening time for myself. And since then, I've built a new business, and it's a coaching consulting company where I help people create their businesses in the right way. From the perspective, what do I want my life to look like first? And then how do I create a business that actually supports that life? And today I get to lead a lot of leaders and, I work about 20, 25 hours a week running my business. And as opposed to that 80, 90 that I did back then. And one of the biggest lessons that I've learned over this entire time, from before when I did it the wrong way to today, is I was trying to be somebody I wasn't back then. And that's one of the reasons I was doing everything wrong, right? Because, everybody told me I need to do it this way and this way and this way. And what ended up happening is like a squirrel, right? Jumping from one nut to another and never actually getting any traction, as opposed to really now stepping into who am I authentically and leading from that particular platform that makes any sense to you.
Yeah, it does. And we'll get into that in depth today as we go. But I want to jump backwards for a second and unpack some of your story. I'm a firm believer that we are the result of all of our experiences, right? And so talk for a minute about, because in your story, I'm hearing a lot of this overcomer thing, right? From good and bad situations. So you leave communist Poland, you come over here with your family, end up in Michigan and things like that. What did that build in you in the sense of like resilience and fortitude? What were some of those lessons you learned with that immigration process?
Yeah, it's a great question, man. One of the things that I learned, just think about it this way. I'm getting thrown into a country that I don't know, into a community I have no idea what's going on. I don't speak any English. And one of the first lessons that I think I learned very early without actually realizing it back then, but looking back, I kind of realized that is like, I don't have control over a lot of things. You know what I mean? And the
Right.
more I try to control things and make sure that there's certainty and all those different things, the worse it gets. The
Hmm.
minute I started basically just kind of going with it and adapting, I think one of the big words that I've had for many periods of my life is that adaptability,
Yeah.
and being able to pivot and not resist the change. I think a lot of leaders, they tend to resist change because what if this, what if there's all those what ifs, right? So I
Right.
think this is one of the big lessons that I've learned over the years, because one of the beliefs that I've learned very quickly in my life, which was kind of a limiting belief, was that I don't have a voice. I don't
Mm.
have any way of making any kind of decisions. So
Mm.
in a way, that kind of forced me to go and not be so like, "Ooh," I got to hold on
Right.
to everything, right? But at that same time, what it did is had me go and not be able to make any decisions. That's why and that belief was basically running my first business anyway. So what ended up happening is that was one big shift. The other thing I think I learned back then very quickly is being present, because
Mm.
one of the things I learned learning the English language is that every single word in the English language has some kind of a meaning, right?
Right.
It means everything's got a meaning. So if I am not paying attention, not being present, then what ends up happening, I miss a lot of those things. And my
Mhm.
first business, again, I wasn't being present because I was being present in the
Mhm.
wrong terms, supposed to being present in moments, so being present with my wife, with my kids, and things like that, and that cost me a lot. So all these different lessons have been able to go and help me go through this awakening in 2011, 2012 to like, oh, so that's
Yeah.
why this went away.
Yeah, that's an interesting story. Thank you for being honest and open about that. That aspect about presence, it's interesting because my assumption would be because you were learning English, and I've heard English is one of the more difficult languages because we have so many different words for the same meanings of things, and words also had different meanings in themselves. Your presence was mandatory for you to actually track where things were going and to understand the conversations and to learn and grow, which means a lot of native English speakers, this is a huge issue in life today, is many of us aren't fully present, right? Life is about scrolling back and forth. We're never fully present in conversations.
Mhm.
We're distracted by everything around us. We've never had the opportunity like you to learn if I'm not fully present, I don't get it. But I think that's happening to us every day. We just don't see it.
Yeah, yeah, it is.
Business
I mean,
leaders,
think about it
family.
this way: like, it's interesting you mentioned about the English language, right? I remember thinking, so wait a minute, am I Polish or am I Polish, right?
Yeah.
The word looks exactly
It's
the same, right? I mean,
That's a
it's a little
great
confusing.
thought.
Come on, people, right?
Yeah.
So well, that was the first instance. But think about it this way: I think leaders, we look for so many different strategies, and we want to figure out these little new like hooks or whatever it might be. Like we constantly look for
Mhm.
ways to up the game, and I think we're overcomplicating a lot of these things. I think it sometimes becomes just being present in the very moment. Because think about it, you're a coach, I'm a
Yep.
coach. In order for us to have an effective conversation with someone, you have to be present in the very moment. You have to be
Absolutely.
curious. You have to be in their kind of stepping in their shoes, right? You have to be in a way that you're non-judgmental and just being completely in that conversation. Now, if you're a leader, if you're in sales, if you're in any kind of a setting where you have to make decision, when you have to, create some kind of a contracts, whatever it might be,
Yeah.
if you just did that, you don't think that's going to make a big difference? Because
Mhm.
every other person in this world is like, go, 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 go. You might be sitting in a minute meeting with someone, but you're already, half hour, 2 days, 5 years into the future thinking, how am I going to do this? What am I going to do? And,
Yep.
and you're not actually present in the very moment.
Absolutely. And it's crazy in coaching. I've run into situations in coaching where I'm listening to them, and what I loved about my coach training was learning to listen, not to respond, but simply to understand.
Yeah.
And what I realized out of this, that's in every relationship. It's made me better as a husband. It's made me better as a father, as a friend, as a
Hmm.
colleague, because so many of us today listen to respond. We actually miss the essence of what people are saying. And
Yeah.
so, one of the greatest things about coaching, I know you learned this too, Peter, in your training, is that reflective listening, right? So,
Yep.
Peter, I hear you saying this. it's not just to make sure we heard them correctly, but it's also make sure we're understanding the background of where they're coming from, the tone of where they're coming from, so that we can help them find out the truth they're trying to find.
Yeah. And if you think about it, here's the crazy thing. I think, especially in today's world, because, over the last 4 or 5 years, there has been so much in our industries and the economy, whatever you want to call it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think people have started to lose trust and whatever it might be. So now, if you're a business owner, entrepreneur, you want to build a business, I think the big missing element is trust. You have to build that
Mm-hmm.
trust. How you build the trust. And I think one of the things that people want to be understood.
Yep.
Like, and if you just do that, listen to understand and be in their shoes kind of thing, starting to recognize like what are they saying underneath what they're saying, all of a sudden you become their ally. You don't become
Absolutely.
that, who is this guy? What is she trying to pull? Those kinds of things, right? And it changes your relationship, shifts the relationship. And now the actual sales or whatever you want to call it becomes more efficient, becomes more authentic in a way.
It does. And you actually hit the key point on that, I think, is that if our mindset is I'm selling, like Peter, I'm
Mm,
selling you something, be it a service, be it a commodity, whatever it is, and I'm not actually trying to build a relationship with you, I might make a little bit of money, but I miss out on opportunity. Because in
yeah.
the end, networking, developing relationships, selling, all those kind of things, it's about relationship. And I would rather hear you and understand you. And I'd rather say, you know what, Peter, that's a great thing, but I actually don't have an answer to you. I mean, I was on a sales call yesterday and I was talking to somebody and he was expressing different needs and he wanted to know how we could help meet those. And I said straight up, we may not be able to meet some of those. And if I can't, I'll let you know because I'm not here to sell you. I'm here to come alongside of you in a relationship.
Yeah.
And relationships are what drive us forward. But so many of us get caught up on the dollars, the quotas, the selling, the trying to measure up. And I think measuring up is what messes us up in life, that we miss relationship.
Yeah. I think that's the ego, right? I
Mm-hmm.
think, a lot of this conversation, the ego is driving. Like, I remember back in the day when I was running this business, I wanted to show myself up like, I have the Lambo or whatever it might be,
Mm,
because you see it all over the internet, right?
right.
So it's that kind of a thinking. And what ended up happening deep down inside, I felt like something was off, right? And
Mm-hmm.
I think most people don't step into their like authenticity, like we're talking about. Like what you said to your client, whoever it was yesterday on the call, was very authentic. And I
Mm-hmm.
think that's what makes the connection. That's why, like, you know what? I appreciate you saying that, Sean. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Most people wouldn't say it. And, let's get back, let's have a conversation and see whether we can work something out. Because you were totally upfront. You weren't trying to be someone that you're not. And all of a
Mm-hmm.
sudden, I think created a much more rapport and created that relationship in a much stronger way. Whether you do business
Absolutely.
with them or not.
Yeah. In the end, it doesn't matter. Right.
Yeah,
I mean, yes,
exactly.
we need to make sales and stuff like that, but it's about relationship. And that's where they appreciate who we are and we can appreciate who they are. So you went back to the word authentic again. So let's transition the conversation a little bit. I know from having talked to you before, you're very open and vulnerable, and I appreciate that. So talk about that awakening you had in 2011 ish. It's ultimately led you to where you're on your work today, and you've even written a book called The Authentic Self Rebirth. I love that title, the rebirth aspect. I mean, you were born your authentic self. It's got to come back out. So just
Right.
share some of that heart wrenching life change for you, and then let's talk about authenticity and what that really means.
Yeah, quick note. Next time I write a book, if I ever write the book, I might have to come up with a title that's easier for me to say, right? Saying the word rebirth. It's interesting. Sometimes I have to say it
It
several
is.
times. So I appreciate you saying it very clearly. Okay. So listen, back to 2011, 2012. I remember asking myself this question: what the hell is wrong with me? And I
Mm,
think a lot of people, when they're going through some tough times, they tend to ask those kinds of questions. And guess what? You're going to get certain type of answers, right? Because your brain doesn't know what's real and what's not. They're just going to
right.
feed you whatever it is that's going to give you some answer. And where is it getting? It's getting from the past experiences, past circumstances, and things like that. So that particular time of my life, I started looking and I started actually questioning what I believed. I never actually
Mm,
questioned it up to this point. You know what I mean?
Yep.
Like,
Yeah.
think about it this way: we all have some beliefs that we believe, like beyond a shadow of a doubt. Like one of those beliefs that I've had back then was, why is everything happening to me? Like, why is bad things happening to me?
Hmm.
Like, it seems like I never have anything to say. And, like looking back when I was 8 years old, I wrote in a book about the frying pan incident. Then when I'm 14, I'm come to the United States. I don't have anything to say. It's like every single time, like, why is this happening to me? Why is this happening to me? Right. And I started questioning it. Is it like life is happening to me? Like it's got some kind of a vengeance on me or something,
Yeah.
and when I started questioning it, like, is it really true? And when I
Mm.
started doing that, and I started going back through my experiences, and I said to myself, well, you know what? If I wasn't coming here when I was 14 years old and didn't come here, then I would then have three amazing kids because I
Right.
have three kids. Just that one little thing. Because, who knows where I would be? Maybe in Poland, maybe whatever it might be, right? So maybe this is happening for me, not to me. And I
Mm.
started looking for those clues, started questioning those beliefs. Life is happening for me. What if everything's happening
Wow.
for me? What if literally every single thing that is happening in my life is happening for me? And that one belief have transformed so many, not only my past, but it got me back to my authenticity. Because the other thing that I've dealt with for a long period of time, especially my first business, my accent. I hated my
Hmm.
accent. And I
Yeah.
think we all, as leaders, have some form of, call it a weakness, that we put a label on it like a weakness,
Sure.
have something that we don't like, that we want to avoid, that we want to eliminate. And when I look from that perspective, I'm like, what if it's not a weakness? What if I could use it to my advantage? And
Right.
guess what? Now, when we do events around the country and we do, you know, um, many events, I actually make fun of it. I make fun of my accent. My
Yeah.
team says that the transcripts are on the back table if you don't understand what Peter is saying, and people laugh about it. There
Yeah.
is a sheet called Peterisms. There's certain
Yeah.
phrases that I say, like for instance, when cows come home. And by the way, when I grew up, we had cows, so cows do come home.
Yeah.
So we can play with those kinds of things to be able to
Yeah.
make a connection with people. Just think about it. People are not robots.
Absolutely.
People are people, right? They're real. And when you start being
Hmm.
real, being authentic with them, you start making a deeper connection,
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
think that's a big missing element in today's world.
Absolutely. And so, thank you for sharing that story. Something that really resonated with me there when you were talking about all those limiting or false beliefs you had, right? And it could have been a combination of both. Some were false, some were just limiting. They're
Yeah.
real, right? They were beliefs, but they're just limiting to you. And how you essentially reframed them, right? And I love that phrase of what if it was for me, not against me. But most of us don't want to go there, Peter, because that means I got to look back and I have to look at difficult circumstances. I have to, in some senses, maybe rip the band aid off, reopen old wounds
Hmm.
that have never healed. So, what would you say to people who are afraid to take that journey of saying, I have to address those things and reframe them?
Yeah, it's a really good question because I think therapy does that a lot, right?
Yeah.
And you go in therapy and you sit there and you relive those painful moments. And to a point, I mean, I think there is some goodness that comes out of it. But if you
Hmm.
constantly keep reliving it, you're just constantly in pain, right? That's
Right.
why coaching comes in because we go into the future. We're looking to the future, how we can create a
Right.
new life kind of thing. Now, one of the things that I've learned is that frying pan incident, that was a very painful moment for me in my life. I'm not going to go into much details unless you want to know, but what ended up happening was really painful moment in my life when it comes to frying pan incident. So in
Hmm.
order for me to go and look from that perspective how it's happening for me, I went back to that moment looking from the perspective of me loving on that 8-year-old, like looking from the
Hmm.
perspective of that 8-year old, like, listen, you, my 8-year old small little Polish friend, right? You
Hmm.
did the best that you knew with what you had at that specific moment. Because if you
Yes.
think about it, we all do that, don't we?
Yep.
Like whatever information that we have in that specific moment, we do the best that we can with the information that we're given.
Yep.
So I look from that perspective and then I said, so what did you learn from that moment? what did you learn, whether
Mhm.
it's good, bad, or the ugly? And there were some ugly things that I've learned. There were some good things that I've learned. But one of the things that I've learned is that, you know what? Look what I've survived. And can accomplish a lot of things in life, right? If I
Absolutely.
wasn't for that moment, I wouldn't be here, and so forth. So there was a lot of great lessons that came out of it. But I look from the perspective of loving on that 8-year-old and showing him, like, listen, you did the best that you knew at that particular moment. And
Mhm.
that changed how I approach that situation. And it no longer has power over me. It's almost like I have
Great
the
phrase.
conversation over it.
Great phrase. I love that very much. And so, listeners, I want you to catch this for a second. I'm sure this has happened to you, Peter, in your coaching. I've heard this from a lot of people, especially through coaching, right? Because we're opening up their minds to new possibilities and things like
Yep.
that. We have all probably used the phrase and or heard the phrase, if I had known then what I know now,
Yeah.
right? And here's my response to that. And I can say this with absolute integrity for me. If I had known then what I know now, I wouldn't have listened to it anyway because I wouldn't have been
Yeah.
ready for it.
Hmm.
Part of that's just maturing. Part of that's experiencing life, the good, the bad, and the ugly, so that we can learn and draw lessons from it. And so, really, what you're saying is profound, but it's simple. It's saying, let's look back and say, what's the lesson? And when I have the lesson, I move on. I've taken what I need to take from it. It no longer
Yeah.
has power over me, no longer has control over me. It's no longer a wound. It may be a scar because I don't want to forget it, but look
Yeah.
at where I am because of it.
Well, scars are not necessarily a bad thing. I mean, think about
No.
it this way: it's war wounds, and you come and you use them to your advantage. And I love that you mention it that way because, yeah, we probably want to have listened.
Hmm.
But here's the thing: what if that situation had to happen in order for you to be who you are? Kind of like it was a lesson. Sometimes it was a tough lesson. Like, for instance, my divorce. It was one of
Hmm.
the hardest times that I've ever experienced in my entire life. Now, I am happily married right now. I've remarried as an amazing wife. I
Congrats.
don't even know how she, ended up, say, you know what? Yes, I do, but I'm grateful for it. She's an amazing woman. And if it wasn't for that divorce, if it wasn't for that period of time, I wouldn't be who I am, kind of a thing, when it comes to this particular relationship, right?
Yeah.
And I wouldn't be so open and vulnerable because I was not vulnerable back then.
Hmm.
So all those things happen for you as long as you keep learning the lessons. You look from the lesson, that the little you know shining light, in that tunnel. When you
Yep.
can see it, all of a sudden it changes things.
Yeah. So your book, The Authentic Self Rebirth, I know from our previous conversation, you talked a little bit about what it truly means to be authentic. You talk about masks and stuff. Just
Mhm.
go into that a little bit, kind of like defining authenticity so we can drive the conversation that way.
Yeah, I think the way I look at it is this: think about it this way. Before, when you came into this earth, and some people, when they're 3, 4, 5 years old, whatever time might be, before you learned all these different beliefs. Because think about it, when you're a little kid, you're like a sponge. You just
Yep.
absorb anything and everything without any kind of filters. You don't go, oh, that's not good. Oh, that's good, because you don't know any better.
Right.
So before all these beliefs, who were you? How are you being? If you really look from that perspective, which maybe you don't remember when you were 3, 4, 5, but you maybe know a kid who's 3, 4, 5 years old.
Hmm.
They're curious, they're open, they're fun, they're fearless, right? You ever seen a
Yeah.
3-year-old boy? I mean, is he
Absolutely.
afraid of anything? Not really. I mean,
No.
sometimes to his detriment, right? I mean, I remember I
Yeah.
fell off a shed when I was little, because like,
Yeah.
let's see if I can fly, right?
Exactly.
So, but the thing is, you're fearless. You are, being in the listening, being present. Have you ever seen a kid play with the blocks? He's present at very moment, right? And that's what I think a lot of those beliefs, as we're learning, takes us away from. And then, especially in the United States here, one of the big shifts that I experienced when I was coming to United States, back in Poland, it was more laid back. Here, it felt like it was always kind of behind the curveball. Like you guys kind of
Mhm.
chasing something, you know what I mean?
Right.
So all this kind of gets us away from that being present, being authentic, being real. like trying not to be someone else. I remember like thinking back to myself, like I feel like there was something missing. Like I
Hmm.
was trying to be someone that I'm not. Like I need to be this polished speaker. Well, that's
Right.
not me. You know what I mean? So when you start looking from the perspective, all of a sudden you get back to that truth in here that tells you, you know what? How I am right now, how I'm showing up, I don't have any reservations. I'm just
Hmm.
being me. Now, caveat to that, I just want to point out that does not mean that you get to be an a hole. You know what I mean? Because I
Correct.
don't think that's someone who's being
Correct.
authentic. But it's a very empowering and really great way of living life and in business.
It is. And I appreciate your little disclaimer there that that is not permission to act unruly or to be cruel to other people.
Yeah.
We were created for a relationship, and we each have our uniqueness. And I truly believe it's interesting to hear your comments about the Polish culture being more laid back versus the American culture, and our listeners from all around the world. So all cultures are different in that. But the phrase I talk about all the time with people, for me personally, I have a faith in God, so I always drive it back to that realm of creation
Mhm.
and stuff. Is life is not about the doing. Life is about being His and being who He created us to be. And when we identify with just being, there's doing that flows out of it, but the doing's not the point. Being is the point. Being God's, being His child, being that husband, being that father, being that friend, being that colleague, whatever it is.
Yeah. And if you think about it in a very simple terms, what are we called human doings or are we called human beings?
Yeah,
That should give you a clue, right?
exactly. But we'd have to
So
pay
yeah,
attention that way. So,
yeah, you're onto something there. Yeah, that's totally true.
so what has it done for you? I know it's a journey, right? We never
Yeah.
arrive. You're not pure, authentic Peter, and you've arrived. It's a lifetime journey for us. But you've come miles and miles and miles. So, what is different for you now in the daily? What's different for you in how you approach yourself and others because you are authentic?
Yeah, so back in the day, I was stressed out. I was always worried about like what's going to happen, how it's going to turn out, and it's like there was something like I don't know how to explain. It was kind of like uneasiness. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
In today's world, the way because of this conversation and like one of the big beliefs, and I talk about this in a book, I talk about how we create meanings about everything. I talk about forgiveness, talk about love, and I talk about this authenticity. It allows me to be present in the very moment. It allows me to see like life happens for me, not to me. Like if everything is happening for me, think about how you are being in life. Well, I can be present with my kids. I can be present with my wife. I can, my calendar, the way I've created my calendar, it's to support my life, not how somewhere is pulling me 20,000 different directions. Because by the way, I don't know if you know this, Sean, but I am Polish Peter, the recovering people pleaser. Okay. So
Yep.
I don't believe that the people pleaser, the label that we have on it, is the authentic person. It's
Hmm.
something that we became in order to what? Survive. So I
Absolutely.
used to not be able to say no to anybody and everybody. And I would
Hmm.
be like running like a chicken with head cut off.
Yep.
Now that I've come back to this authenticity, one thing I know that I need to protect my calendar, protect my, who I am, spending time with the Lord, just like you in the morning,
Mhm.
being fed with this. And what ends up happening is I live more like at ease in the present moment. I'm
Yeah.
curious about life, whatever I end up doing, and it's pretty. I don't know how to explain. It's pretty awesome. Let's just go with that. I
Absolutely.
mean, it's pretty amazing way to live.
Absolutely. I'm laughing when you said you're Polish Peter, the recovering people pleaser. I tell people all the time I'm a recovering people pleaser, not
Yeah.
recovered,
Yeah.
recovering. It still happens in different ways. And, you know, your aspect of why you're a people pleaser is going to be different from mine and other people, right?
Yep.
In my sense, I was always praised as a kid, and Sean, you'll do this, you'll do this, you'll do this. So I felt that I had to measure up, right? To those
Hmm.
expectations. Now, they weren't expectations from those people, but I heard them as expectations. And
Right.
so, because of that, that's where I ended up putting on a mask, right? Because I'm trying to
Hmm.
become something that they want me to be or what I thought they wanted to be or expected me to be.
Hmm.
When you become authentic, there's so much peace that comes with it. And
Yeah.
I think today, especially, when you look at social media and people scrolling, either we want to be somebody else that we see, but by the way, what we're seeing on social media is probably not reality of who that person is.
Yeah.
Or most of us, and I want to talk about this for a second, I'd be curious your perspective. We live in fear of other people's judgment, but who cares what someone else thinks, right?
Yeah.
How do you balance I care about people and I care about their feelings, but not their judgment of me?
Right. That's a great question because yeah, I think this happens a lot on social media, especially. It's like think about it, you come up to this playground and every single person that comes to the playground is wearing some kind of a mask. You know, when you go to
Mhm.
a mask ball, it's
Yeah,
basically like, and we don't actually see who the other people are. And people are because of the mask, they feel like they can point finger here and and judge and whatever it might be. But I think at the end of the day, it's not so much that other people judge us, that's what we're wondering about, and that's what we're worrying about protecting. It's that what we judge ourselves on that it might
hmm,
reveal that. Because think about it this way, if you really think about it, we are probably one of the worst judges of ourselves than anybody can ever do.
yeah,
So what ends up happening is that we judge ourselves because somebody says something negative about me or about the situation. And guess what? What's the conversation in my head that's happening because of that? Oh, I can't believe I said that. Or why would I do that? Or, yeah, I think they're right, you know? And it's almost this conversation of like fearful, like never enough, never good enough, never loved, never appreciated. By the way, my whole people pleaser was in order to make sure that I'm liked. Because if I'm
yeah,
liked, then people like me, then they love me, and they want to be with me. They want to hang around with me. You know what I mean?
exactly,
So
exactly.
there was that. Now, how do I deal with that? Well, think about it this way. You talked about being a Christian.
Hmm.
Jesus, when he walked this earth, he constantly talked about loving the neighbor. Love the
Yep.
neighbor, as, as yourself. And I started thinking about like, well, you know what? How do I love myself? Because when I was in 2011, 2012 time, believe me, I did not love myself. I didn't even like
Yeah,
myself. So I think it starts with us. What if
it
I
does.
loved myself? What if I love myself for who I am and who I'm not? The good, the bad, and the ugly. And just
Yep.
loving all of that. Because guess what? If I just do that, love that, then guess what? There is no judgment in that space, is there?
Hmm.
So if there is no judgment in that space, me judging myself like I'm bad or whatever it might be, then whatever somebody says or does doesn't matter anymore
Right.
because they can't, kind of like throw these little arrows at me. And it changes the perspective. So it starts with me looking from the perspective. Am I judging myself? Because we judge ourselves like crazy. So
We do.
love on yourself. Like I have a whole chapter in the book that talks about having this love, this unconditional love. And when you start looking from that perspective, if like, you know what? And again, disclaimer, that doesn't mean that you become an a-hole. It just
Hmm.
means that you love everything about like my accent kind of thing.
Yeah. No, and again, those people that are the a-holes, right? I actually hurt for them because of what you're describing. There's something that they're judging themselves and
Oh
they're
yeah, big
holding
time.
themselves in a
Hmm.
way and carrying themselves in a way that if they're treating other people harshly, it's actually not about those other people. It's
Yeah.
about them, right? And so this goes in this whole realm. I'm a firm, firm, firm believer in continuous growth and improvement, right? Not because we are inferior, but because there's always more, right? And
Yeah.
that's that mindset of I need to grow not because I suck. I need to grow because there's growth and I want to grow and I want to become better. I want to become the best version of myself. And I want my wife to become that, my child to become that, my friends to become that. And it's really just the mindset issues. Everything we're talking about today is about mindset and
Yeah.
those beliefs. And do I really believe that I can become the best version of myself? Which means some people won't be drawn to me. That's okay. I'll take your story as a direct illustration of this. You jokingly said you're happily married now. I don't know why she would have come to me or however you said
Yeah.
that. The reality is that's the point. You're
Yeah.
authentic Peter. She fell in love with who you were, not who you were trying to be.
Right.
And in marriage, as we grow, one of the most difficult parts of long term marriage is you're going year after year, long term meaning more than 2 years, right? Is I'm not the same person my wife married 32 years ago. She's not the same person I married 32 years ago. But we need to know who we are today to keep making year 33 better
Yeah. That's
by
when
being.
curiosity comes in a
Mhm.
marriage, constant over the years, right?
Talk
Think
about
about it,
that
just
for a
curious
second.
about your wife, right?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Talk about how that plays out for you. Curiosity in the marriage.
Well, think about it this way. Like, I remember when I was, first started dating my wife. I found out a lot of times that people will go like, first few months or first year or whatever, right? The honeymoon phase, whether it's in
Hmm.
dating or it's in marriage. I'm going to put my best foot forward.
Yeah.
What does that mean? I think that means it's like you put on some kind of a mask. And ultimately, that mask comes off. And
Yeah.
then people are like, who did I marry? Right. So when you
Hmm.
start looking from the perspective of just being authentic, let's start from the get go. You know what I mean? My wife knows exactly who I am and how I am, and that's who she married, and vice versa. Right. And I always emphasize that. So being curious, like looking from the perspective of like, when we have an argument in a marriage,
Hmm.
getting in her shoes, being curious over there, trying to listen to understand, like you mentioned earlier, not to defend. And I think that's what in my first marriage, it was a big problem for me, right?
Yeah.
Try to defend. I was defending, defending, defending. Now, in today's world, that means that trying to understand what she's saying, being in her shoes, and it changes how we start to have conversations. So being curious, being like, think about it this way. We all have stories that we call our life, right? Now, I just met you, a couple of times, Sean. So
Yeah.
maybe I know maybe half a percent of your story.
Correct.
You know your story. Probably, I would say 80% of your story that you yourself know. And the reason why I'm saying that is because you forgot some things. Some things
Hmm.
were not important, so you just discounted them or whatever it might be, right? Then
Yeah.
there is your wife. Your wife probably knows 60% of your story because it would be almost impossible for you to tell her everything and anything about that particular person, right?
Right.
So, but what ends up happening when we go into marriage and we've been married to 2, 5, 10, 30 years, we have this belief I already know how you are. I already know you. Do you now? Because if you know
Right.
60% of our story, then if you start getting curious a little bit more, you start looking, you know what? I want to get to that close to 100% as possible.
Yeah.
And when you start looking from that perspective, guess what? Your conversations change. How you interact with that person changes. You become, because we all want to be loved and appreciated and connected. Let's do that in
Absolutely.
marriages. Let's do that in business. Let's do that in relationships. You'll be surprised what happens.
Absolutely. And that 20% you describe that we don't know about ourselves, and then the 40% our spouse doesn't know about us. I don't know what your take is on that, but to me, what I hear in that is that's more of the story to come, right? We're
Yeah.
evolving. We're not the same people because of this, loops back to the beginning of the conversation, because of situations and experiences. There's new experiences all the time. I mean, most of us are not the same people today because of COVID. Most of
Yep.
us are not the same people today because of a job change, because of a life change. And so the joy of marriage, especially godly marriage, is taking that journey with someone in an authentic way. So we have to do it together, or we get to do it together. We don't have to do it alone.
Right.
That's where joy comes in.
And you get to do it in a way where you can be, let's say, for lack of a better word, fully exposed and that
Hmm.
person's still there, kind of a thing. And it goes both ways.
Absolutely.
And think
Absolutely.
about that. You become like the power couple that nobody can, you know,
Hmm.
do anything.
Yeah, that's God's version of what grace really is. The phrase I use for it is we, on a human level, have that type of grace when, Peter, I can know the worst of you and love you more, not less, because of it.
Exactly.
That's where grace plays.
Yep.
Awesome.
And
Well,
you
great
did a great example of
conversation.
doing that.
Go ahead.
And I said, and God, Jesus, it was a great example of that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, man, I love this conversation. I feel like we could keep going on and on and on. Listeners, in the show notes today, you'll find links if you want to reach out to Peter. You'll find a link to purchase his book, Authentic Self-Rebirth. But Peter, I hope, hey, we stay in touch. We might have a follow-on conversation about this to see where things are going. And I love the accent personally, by the way. I think it's an endearing piece of who you are. But we finish every episode, Peter, with the same question. It's a quick tip question. Peter, for our listeners, what is something they can intentionally do today to be a better leader?
I would say be in the moment. Meaning, I know it's probably been said 1,000 times, but I think it's such an important aspect to look from the perspective of being in the moment. Like, enjoy every single moment right now. Like, if you were, let's say, even like eating an apple, enjoy that apple. Like, bite into it and taste it, and like being in that moment from that perspective. Meaning, everything that's right in front of you is the most important thing right now. Whether it's your wife, whether it's the apple, whether it's your kids, or whatever it might be, or your business partner, it changes how you operate in life, and it becomes much more, I think, authentic, for the lack of a better word.
Fantastic. Great insights. Well, Peter, it's been great to have you on the Intentional Leader podcast. Good luck in your marriage. Good luck with your business and your coaching. And I hope our paths cross again.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of the Intentional Leader podcast presented by Reenergize Professional Coaching. Be sure to see the show notes for links to Reenergize Professional Coaching and links to contact our guests. Now, hit that subscribe button so that you are alerted with every new episode of the Intentional Leader podcast.